Hey everyone, I know I'm late to the party with this one, but I still wanted to talk about it. Around Easter, there was a clip making the rounds of world famous atheist, author, and evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins referring to himself as a cultural Christian. And in a way, I was surprised by how much other people seem to be surprised by the statement. Because as someone who's been following Dawkins since the old Four Horsemen days, I could have sworn this isn't the first time he's ever referred to himself as such. I remember years ago he and some other prominent atheists, I can't remember if among them were any of the other horsemen like Dennett and Harris, but they had even shared pictures of themselves posing with their Christmas trees. And I think it was around that same time that back then he had referred to himself as culturally Christian. And as he also does in the more recent clip in question, mentions how he enjoys hymns and carols, religious architecture, cathedrals and churches, etc. It's just that he doesn't buy into the miracle stories or any of the supernatural faith claims. So to reiterate, this isn't the first time he's taken a stance like this, but some are treating it like this is some kind of dramatic heel turn, Richard Dawkins moving even further, culturally right and embracing religion, when he emphasizes at least 3 or 4 times, I think, if you watch the entire interview, and he says it pretty brazenly or unapologetically, that he thinks the supernatural claims of Christianity are complete nonsense. And nonsense is, I believe, his exact word. And I've chopped the interview, which I think was about 8 minutes long originally, into segments, and I'll comment as we go. And near the beginning of the interview, and that's where the clip that one kind of viral came from, the beginning of the interview, he mentioned something in passing about Ramadan replacing Easter, and I wasn't sure what that was all about, so I looked into it. And apparently in Westminster, London, they had decorated a window display of the City Hall Municipal Building for Ramadan, but there was no corresponding Easter display. And it wasn't until people brought it up or started complaining that they supposedly made a slapdash effort to throw together an Easter display. And it was funny, I ended up watching multiple YouTube clips on the controversy taken from British news shows that seemed eerily similar to our Fox News, here in the States. But apparently that was the impetus for the interview or Dawkins' comments, this controversy or debate about whether or not Easter is being replaced by Ramadan in Britain. Hey everyone, so I always try to be as accurate and as honest as possible, so I'm chiming in to make a correction or offer a clarification. I was making it sound like there were numerous people lodging complaints because there wasn't a corresponding Easter display. Well, apparently it was one specific individual, a Tory councillor by the name of Paul Swaddle. Well, there may have been other people complaining, but it was this individual councillor who raised the concern or pointed out that there was a Ramadan display in the building's window, but no corresponding Easter display. And it was then that, as I described, they hurriedly rushed around trying to quickly throw together an Easter display. But we now return to the week in doubt, already in progress. And Ramadan is the correct pronunciation, right? I wanted to make sure I wasn't unconsciously calling it Ramadan or something. Okay, but here's the first clip.
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. It's true that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it wouldn't matter if certainly if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful.
And so, once again, that portion of the interview you just heard is pretty much the portion that went viral. After watching the interview in its entirety on YouTube, I went into the comments section and I was somewhat surprised by how much pushback or resentment Dawkins was getting, and not from Muslims who maybe resented his comments about Islam, but rather from Christian commenters who seemed to take offense at him identifying as or using the term culturally Christian. I thought like maybe some of the big right-wing talking heads, they might be grateful in a way or happy that if not defending actual Christian belief, he was at least defending Christian culture. But that didn't necessarily seem to be the case. But I can get how if you're a true believer, you might find it offensive that someone would tell you that the supernatural beliefs at the heart of your religion are all nonsense, but then still claim the mantle of that religion in a cultural sense. Maybe that's how they were viewing it. But I nevertheless think that cultural Christian can be an apt term, and it's not just Christianity. I've heard a number of people in secular circles who had an Islamic upbringing refer to themselves as culturally Muslim, and it makes sense. Culture and religion are so interwoven, religion is a part of culture, that of course you're going to have people, like myself for instance, who have come to doubt things like the existence of a higher power, supernatural faith claims, miracle stories, etc., but still feel an attachment to some of the traditions they were brought up with, like the observance of or getting together with family on certain religious holidays, Christmas and Easter, as well as more raucous customs like wearing green and getting sloshed on St. Patrick's Day, especially here in the Boston area, or partying and celebrating all things spooky on All Hallows Eve. And not to get sidetracked, but I know there's a whole discussion we could have regarding the pagan roots or influences of certain holidays like Christmas and Halloween, which I've done documentary episodes on in the past. And I think marking certain times of year like the harvest or midwinter or the coming of the spring with festivals or celebrations, I think that's almost universal. But like Dawkins, I also appreciate sacred music, Christmas carols, religious architecture, that kind of thing. But I'm personally not really in the habit of referring to myself as culturally Christian. Maybe once or twice I might have on the show in the past, along with some sort of caveat or clarification, like if this is how you define being culturally Christian, maybe I technically am. But I think I'm kind of hesitant to adopt such a term more readily because I don't want to give the impression that I'm in any way practicing. There are people who are nominally Christian only in name, but still practicing. They don't believe but still attend church and go through the motions, maybe because they nevertheless still believe in Christian values, or they continue to go out of a sense of tradition, or because they think it's what they're supposed to do, or it might be good for their kids, which is a whole nother topic. But other than celebrating certain holidays or attending a funeral service for a departed loved one on occasion, I'm in no way practicing. And as much as I find some aspects of Christianity fascinating, I'm just as much, if not more, fascinated by other religious traditions or belief systems or things like folklore or world mythology. And there's so much in that one little clip, and we have about 5 or 6 more to go, and I'm trying to keep it all sorted in my head. So he, meaning Dawkins, also says that he feels at home in the quote-unquote Christian ethos. I have some mixed feelings about that because I think ethically Christianity can be kind of a mixed bag. At its best, I think Christianity can inspire or encourage charity, community, helping the less fortunate, etc. But I think, unfortunately, Christian morality is often also informed by some of the harsher Old Testament stuff. You know, if a man lies with a man as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death, or thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. And of course, I don't think the average Christian wants homosexuals to be put to death. Not at all. But I do think verses like that from Leviticus about homosexuality are at least partially responsible for the Christian condemnation of homosexuality, and it can lead to the othering of gay people and even cause them to be ostracized from their own families because their Christian family members view their lifestyle as a sin. And some people might think it's silly to bring up witches in 2024, but I live not that far from Salem where the infamous witch trials took place. And sadly, there's still fundamentalist Christians ranting about witches today, and there's still people being persecuted for witchcraft in other parts of the world, such as Africa by African Christians, due in part to the importation of fundamentalist Christianity. But the debate about Christian ethics aside, I get not wanting to see the culture you grew up in disappear. I wouldn't want to see churches and cathedrals and Christian holidays disappear either. That's why I think when it comes to immigration, and just a podcaster speaking here, and maybe it's stating the obvious, but I think it's a matter of balance. You want to give the people you take in the freedom to celebrate aspects of their own culture and practice their traditions, while at the same time not sacrificing your own culture and traditions in the process. That's why I totally get people being upset by what I believe is a government building having a Ramadan display and not a corresponding Easter display. Well, they did set up an Easter display, as I mentioned, but apparently only after receiving complaints, which would also concern me. Why did they need to be reminded or called out in order to do the right thing? If no one had said anything, would they just have foregone the Easter display altogether? I guess if you want to be charitable, you could argue, hey, Ramadan starts earlier, maybe that's why there was only a Ramadan display at first. But still, I think people consider March or, spring in general as kind of the Easter season, especially if you include Lent. And they seem to really wait till the last minute and only after, once again, having it brought up to them to actually put up an Easter display, so that excuse might not necessarily hold water, so to speak. And then I noticed in some of the articles I read and clips I watched, people were also complaining about Ramadan lights being on display all over London. But I guess my question concerning that is, were the lights replacing traditional Easter decorations? Were there also Easter decorations, whether they be religious or, the eggs and the flowers, up throughout London as well, which I think would be the right thing out of a sense of fairness and parity, and to help Christian or Native European Londoners know or feel assured that their own traditions weren't being eclipsed. But yeah, as long as newer immigrant traditions aren't being given priority or preference over existing traditions, I think it'd be kind of cool to see different faiths and their holidays being celebrated. As you can probably tell from my absurd accent, I am not from London or the UK or Europe. I'm on the other side of the pond once again in the Boston area. And in this neck of the woods, this isn't really a problem here. At Christmas, it's Christmas decorations and lights, including a nativity scene all around, around the town common. You go into a supermarket or a grocery store, it's all Christmas candy or all Easter candy. I remember being a kid decades ago, and you'd go to school and everything would be Christmas, etc. Here and there might be a Hanukkah sign or something like that. So I know we do have a mosque in town, but once again, in my neck of the woods, I haven't really seen any kind of obvious displays for Indian or Islamic holidays. Not that I would mind. Like I said, I would think it'd be cool to see, as long as they weren't getting rid of Easter or Christmas, I think it'd be cool to see various faiths being celebrated. But let's listen to the second clip. Here we go.
As we know, church attendance is plummeting, but the erection of mosques across Europe, I think 6,000 are under construction, and there are many more, are being planned. So do you regard that as a problem? Do you think that matters?
Yes, I do, really. I have to choose my words carefully. If I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I choose Christianity every single time. It seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion. in a way that I think Islam is not.
I think you're going to have to explain why you say that, Professor Dawkins. Why is Islam
Well, the way
fundamentally
that
not decent like Christianity?
yes, I mean the way women are treated. I mean, Christianity is not great about that. It's had its problems with female vicars and female bishops and things, but there's an active hostility to women, which is promoted, I think, by the holy books of Islam. I'm not talking about individual Muslims, who, of course, are quite different, but the doctrines of Islam, the Hadith and the Quran, is fundamentally hostile to women, hostile to gays. Um, and I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
So the interviewer mentions church attendance plummeting, while something like 6,000 mosques are supposedly being built throughout Europe. Hey everyone, I'm back with another clarification or correction. The interviewer states that there's 6,000 mosques currently under construction, with more planned. But I was just reading an article or post from the Friendly Atheist, and he was saying that the Daily Mail had recently reported that there are 6,000 mosques currently in Europe already built, with more planned. And so he was suggesting that maybe either intentionally or unintentionally, the interviewer was making it sound worse than it was, or maybe trying to inflate the numbers to scaremonger. Was he not being charitable? Was it unintentional? I don't know. Or who's right, her or the Daily Mail? I believe he suggested that she was getting those numbers probably from the Daily Mail. Anyway, I just wanted to offer that clarification. Now back to the Week in Doubt once again, already in progress. I remember reading recently about how belief in God has really declined in the UK. I think Dawkins even alludes to that briefly in that last clip. And Dawkins seems to think it's a good thing. Personally, I'm kind of torn. On the one hand, I'm someone who likes to dream that someday we might reach a kind of Star Trek-esque utopia in the future, a society or civilization based on science and humanism. So in that sense, I think people moving away from superstition and a belief in the supernatural is a good thing. But on the other hand, there's part of me that hopes I'm wrong regarding my atheistic worldview or lack of belief, that hopes that maybe just maybe there might be an afterlife or some higher power. I don't want to believe there's nothing after this, it's just where my reason leads me. So whenever I hear that belief in God or belief in life after death is on the decline, I'm kind of like, oh shit, I'm probably right. If I have my doubts, that's one thing. If everyone else does too, maybe we're all onto something. But the thing about the mosques, that's pretty wild, 6,000. And I can understand why that might raise some concern. Like I was saying earlier, I think there's a balance that needs to be attempted where the people welcomed into your country are allowed to practice their faith, celebrate their traditions, including erecting places of worship, but while at the same time trying to make sure that your own culture isn't being erased, or that your native citizens don't feel like their culture is being erased. And of course, here in North America, the US, and Canada, we have a very poor track record, shall we say, regarding our treatment of Indigenous peoples. But in the UK and Europe, which we're talking about at the moment, the white Europeans happen to be the Indigenous peoples. And of course, these are people who've been Christian in many cases for over a millennium. So I get why people might hear 6,000 mosques and think, wow, that sure sounds like a lot, and wonder what effect that might have on their existing culture, or how it might reshape society in the long run. And one concern, I think it's a real concern, even though it makes me feel somewhat nervous or uneasy just broaching it, because I certainly don't want to be considered an Islamophobe, but I feel like it has to be brought up if we're going to have an honest conversation. Is obviously a history of incidents of Islamic extremism in Europe, of terror attacks, sometimes at least partially plotted from within mosques. And I think it would be intellectually dishonest to say that doesn't come to mind for people as a possible concern when they hear about 6,000 mosques. And I know that's probably not a politically correct thing to say, and I don't mean to disrespect the vast majority of peaceful, decent Muslims who just want to live their lives and practice their faith and have never engaged in any kind of extremism. But I think it would be unrealistic or dishonest to try to say that there hasn't been a problem with Islamic extremism in the UK/Europe as well as here in the States in the past. And we could get into a whole nother conversation, is another a real word anyway, conversation about what causes terrorism and weird time to be laughing. What causes terrorism and extremism. The fact that it doesn't occur in a vacuum, and that there's factors like Western interference abroad, etc. But that doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, obviously, terrorism bad, and it's unacceptable, and it's natural to be concerned about it. And hopefully this isn't coming across as Islamophobic, because that's certainly not my intent. And in fact, talking about all this kind of reminds me of back around, was it 2016, maybe earlier, when everyone was always talking about terrorism and Islam, and it was like a tightrope walk, trying to thread the needle, trying to condemn terrorism without seeming like you're condemning an entire faith and its adherents. And I suppose that might bring us to Richard Dawkins' comments about Christianity being a fundamentally decent religion in comparison to Islam, and that if given a choice, he'd choose Christianity every time. Well, like I was saying earlier, to some degree it might depend on what kind of strain or approach to Christianity we're talking about. Fundamentalist Christianity with a heavy emphasis on Old Testament law. That's not great. And even the New Testament, which we think of as being kinder and gentler, has some perhaps questionable stuff in it. Stuff about, is it in Ephesians, the quote about how women should submit to their husbands, similar to the way, a man should submit to the Lord. And that gets tricky because I think in practice, women actually experienced a fair amount of equality in the early church. I believe there were even female pastors or presbyters, I forget or not sure what the proper terminology is. And in some cases, maybe there were one and the same, but also powerful, wealthy patronesses or female church elders who would hold Christian events and meetings, meals, and that kind of thing. But yeah, there does seem to be some stuff that seems rather antiquated from our modern perspective regarding the New Testament's view of women. But then there's other passages, like I think it's in Galatians, the bit about there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, because slave or free, because everyone is free or one within Christ. Something to that effect. I'm going by memory. And I'm sure some people might try to reconcile those what seem like contradictions. But to me, as a skeptic, man-made holy book containing various books written by different authors at different times, so you'd probably expect a bit of contradiction. Yeah, I actually found it. It's, Galatians verses 28 to 29. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to promise. I'm not a believer, but that's kind of a nice sentiment. And I believe that's specifically Galatians 3. Verses 28 to 29. And I also found that bit from Ephesians I was talking about. Ephesians, chapter 5, verse 22 to 33. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Now I know apologists might try to spin that, or there's probably Christian fundamentalists who love that just the way it sounds on face value. But I'm like, if that's the 1950s life you want to live and it's consensual and you don't mind submitting to someone else, go for it, I guess. But seems outdated and a bit oppressive to me. So, hell of a choice for an atheist or a non believer, Islam or Christianity. Obviously, I'd rather not have any religious yoke around my neck. And in fairness, it should be noted, just like there's various strains of Christianity and Christian culture isn't monolithic, there's various strains of Islam and Islamic culture isn't monolithic either. There's many different Muslim countries or nations, and some are harsher and more draconian, especially towards women. There's places that practice things like female genital mutilation, stoning, women not being able to drive or travel alone. And there's other places like Turkey, Tunisia, Morocco that are more progressive and where women are freer. I believe in Tunisia and Turkey, women have full equal rights, I think. And in Morocco, there's been a lot of progress made regarding women's rights. They can be the head of a household, and I think there's laws against gender-based violence. Yeah, it's interesting. I was just double checking myself, and I was looking up women's rights in Turkey. And yeah, it says women have actually had the right to vote in Turkey since 1934. And in 2002, the Turkish government reformed Turkish criminal and civil law, and since then, the rights of women and men during marriage, divorce, and any subsequent property rights have all been equalized. And I was just double checking myself on Tunisia as well. Tunisia is frequently cited as being at the forefront of women's rights in the Arab world because of the unique status of Tunisian women. And then from the Wilson Center, women's equality came into question and was settled in the 2014 Constitution that stated women and men were equal citizens and granted women gender parity, largely through quotas. All right, I don't want to get lost in too much of a digression. I just wanted to quickly check myself real time. Well, not real time for you. You're listening to a recording. Anyway, getting too analytical. In the upcoming clip, at one point Dawkins will kind of comically note that there's a difference between British Christians and American Christians, referencing the more fundamentalist streak here in the US, etc. Not to mention the draconian abortion laws being put into place. Most recently, an almost complete ban on abortion, dating back to the 19th century, was revived in Arizona. I think before the vote, a bunch of right-wing Christian politicians gathered on the Senate floor. I saw the video. They were basically on their hands and knees, and they started speaking in tongues. So here in the States, at least, it sometimes feels like we're creeping dangerously close to theocracy. And I think the host also touches on that in this clip I'm about to play, but here we go.
Just for balance, should we say something about fundamentalist Christians who, we can see abortion rights, reproductive rights being rolled back in Republican states in America. So Christianity is still not without its problems when it comes to women and their rights.
Well, you didn't ask me about Christianity in America. That's a different matter entirely.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm sure we got some fundamentalist Christians here too, but not as public.
Well, insofar as fundamentalist Christians oppose evolution and think that the world was created 6,000 years ago, I mean, that is pernicious nonsense, of course.
So I agree with that clip 100%. But let's move on to the next one. And here Dawkins seems to denounce Islam even more strongly than in the previous clips.
I see where you come from. I like the phrase, you're a cultural Christian. I think I'm a bit more than a cultural Christian, although, it does, my belief waxes and wanes. Would it be a good thing or a bad thing if we became a less Christian country? And just on the the foundation of this nation, with the king being the head of church and state, do you think it provides a solid foundation that we would lose something if, let's say, there was a Muslim majority?
Well, yes. I think the king, when he was Prince of Wales, was actually rather sympathetic towards Islam, and one of the problems I felt. No, I think it would be a terrible thing. And insofar as Christianity can be seen as a bulwark against Islam, I think it's a very good thing. I mean, in Africa, for example, where you have missionaries of both faiths operating, I'm on Team Christian side as far as that's concerned.
I actually appreciate the host or interviewer's honesty there when she admits how her faith tends to fluctuate. And so, once again, by my strange accent, you can probably tell I don't live in the UK. I'm not familiar with Prince Charles, now King Charles, his record on Islam. So I'm not exactly sure what Dawkins is referring to when he says he thought Charles was too sympathetic towards Islam. Okay, so I just did a quick search, and apparently Charles has had a deep interest in a number of religions going back decades. He's apparently studied Islam pretty deeply and also has an interest in Greek Orthodox Christianity and Judaism. And I love people who have an interest in the study of religion. I might be a skeptic and a non believer, but I've always found religion absolutely fascinating and love learning about the history and culture of different traditions or faiths. And I'll try not to take up too much time with it, but there's an interesting article in the New Arab, and I'll just read a few paragraphs here and there. From the 1990s, some Sufi sheikhs have been keen to claim a crypto-Muslim theory about Charles's hidden personal Islam on the basis of their own spiritual dream visions. The genealogical claim of Mohammedan lineage in the royal family is also historically dubious, so both claims can be safely set to one side. The truth about Charles is that he is a committed Islamophile. He has studied the Quran and even started learning Arabic to further that end. He is a fan of Martin Ling's Abu Bakr Siraj al-Din, I think it is, his acclaimed biography of the Prophet Muhammad, and the noted English Sufi and keeper of the Oriental manuscripts at the British Library. The king is tolerably well read in Sufi doctrine. He has an abiding interest in Islamic architecture, arts, and gardens. He set up the School of Traditional Arts near Regent's Park that teaches the traditional Islamic arts at master's level. And he is patron to the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies, where he has sponsored a young Muslim leadership program. In 2007, he set up Mosaic, a mentoring program focused on Muslim young people. And I know there might be some people wondering why he devotes so much of his time or attention to Islam, and they're probably wondering why he isn't focusing that time and attention elsewhere. But I think having things like mentoring programs for young Muslim people is a good thing, because that's probably the kind of thing that can keep people, young people from feeling lost and alienated and becoming radicalized. And it continues, besides his focus on Islam, King Charles has also studied Greek Orthodoxy and frequently visited Mount Athos, in part because his paternal grandmother Alice was an Orthodox nun. Similarly, he has also studied Judaism with some seriousness and is close to the former chief rabbi Jonathan Sacks. But yeah, and hopefully I don't sound like a broken record, but I think as long as, once again, you're not sacrificing your own culture or your security or safety, and by that I mean being soft on crime, not investigating or prosecuting crimes in immigrant communities out of fear of the optics or blowback, which I believe was a problem in some instances in the UK, maybe several years back. Maybe it still is, I don't know. But as long as you're not sacrificing those things on the altar of political correctness, I think it's a good thing to build bridges to show respect and goodwill to the various communities you've welcomed into your nation. And I think it's better to welcome and embrace those you've taken in rather than alienate or other them, which is probably much more likely to cause resentment and radicalization. And regarding my claims about authorities looking the other way, just so people don't think I'm pulling stuff out of you-know-where, there were these controversies involving so-called rape gangs or grooming gangs, and almost this systemic problem with girls being preyed upon in immigrant communities. And this is actually from Al Jazeera, so not exactly a right-wing anti-Muslim publication. And this is from February 2024, the UK's grooming gangs and the lessons never learned. Let me see. In August 2014, a groundbreaking report by former senior social worker Alex J. revealed that an estimated 1,400 children had been sexually abused in the town, and I think that's Rotherham, from 1997 to 2013, predominantly by Pakistani British men. It revealed that council staff and others knew of the abuse, but turned a blind eye to what was happening and refused to identify the perpetrators, in part for fear of being branded racist. So I just want to bring some receipts so people don't think I'm just being ignorant or bigoted or making stuff up. And I know immigration is a controversial or hot button issue. In my opinion I think every nation and its people should have a right to decide who they want to let into their country and at what rate. And hopefully the decisions regarding immigration and other issues made by the people in power reflect the will of the people, which often they probably don't, let's be real. And I know it's also complicated because the quote-unquote people aren't always of one mind on a given issue, which is what elections are for, I guess. You vote for the person you think best represents your values, and keep your fingers crossed that they'll actually live up to their word and do something useful, which often they don't. But off my soapbox and up onto another soapbox. But I think whatever your stance on immigration is, once people are allowed into your country, they should be treated with respect and dignity and welcomed. But at the same time, if there's crimes taking place or crime taking place within a certain community, you shouldn't look the other way out of political correctness or out of fear of the optics. And I'm not saying you should act like the Gestapo. You just investigate crimes, wherever they occur, hold people accountable like you would with if it was involving any native-born citizen. I think that's common sense. All right, now off that soapbox. But I do feel like I'm walking that old tightrope from the old days, trying to thread that needle. Am I woke? Am I bigoted? I think I'm just being me. I'm trying to be honest, fair, and say what I actually think. And then Dawkins talks about Christianity serving as a bulwark against Islam in Africa. And as I alluded to earlier when talking about witchcraft in passing, some of the effects fundamentalist, Pentecostal, and evangelical Christian groups and pastors have had on Africa is pretty disturbing. I'm sure there's probably I know there are Christian charitable organizations that do good work in Africa, but I'm talking about the import of fundamentalist Christianity, resulting in these really extreme African Christians who rail against homosexuality and accuse people of witchcraft. And paranoia about witchcraft is nothing new in Africa, but certainly doesn't help that you're further encouraging it and giving them scriptural justification. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure spreading Islam throughout Africa probably isn't great either. Obviously, there's dangerous Islamist groups at work there, like Boko Haram, etc. Maybe we should just help people without spreading religion. Human kindness, education, sandwiches, not necessarily in that order. But let's listen to the next clip.
It's interesting because I sort of thought that you would be more of a Hitchinite, God is not great advocate, but it's interesting to me that you see the value and the force for good of the United Kingdom having a Christian foundation.
Yes, but I must emphasize that I think that the things that Christians believe are actually nonsense. I mean, I think that when you say you waver, I wanted to ask you, do you actually believe that Jesus had a virgin for a mother? Do you actually believe he rose from the dead? I suspect you probably don't.
Since you ask, Richard, if I may, because I was at New College when you were. Are you still a Don at New College? Yes.
Well, I'm retired.
You're retired, yes, but you don't look anyway. Weirdly, I was just 3 weeks ago at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, where the Christians believe that Christ was crucified, or there was the tomb, or the Gethsemane was just there, and Golgotha was there. And I have to admit that there is a real force. I mean, it feels like the fulcrum of three world religions. It really does. And Christianity is palpable there. The place pulses with Christianity. I don't know whether it made me believe the Bible anymore, but I certainly felt that Jesus was a historical figure. Yes, I did believe that.
So I absolutely love that clip. I love when people directly confront, well, on TV and debates, interviews, etc. Might be a bit rude at a party or, in everyday life. But I love when people just point blank publicly ask people if they literally believe in things like the virgin birth or whether or not Jesus actually rose from the dead. Because one of my pet peeves is that slippery, evasive, wishy-washy Jordan Petersonian approach to religion, where he blurs the line between the figurative and the literal and dances around any attempts to nail him down on whether or not he actually believes in things like an actual creator God or the supernatural faith claims of Christianity. And I value the power of religious and mythological symbolism, but I also value intellectual honesty, and I like to know whether people actually believe this stuff or not. So good on Dawkins for being so direct. And I imagine it wasn't intended to be comical, but when she tells this story about going to Jerusalem and how she could feel Christianity there, it was like this palpable energy. I thought she was going to say she felt the presence of the risen Christ or something like that, but no, she just says straight-faced that she felt like he was a guy that existed. Yeah, he was probably a historical figure. That was the big transformative revelation. I think even the lion's share of atheists probably believe he was a historical figure. Me personally, I'm agnostic on the historicity of Jesus. I have no problem believing he very well might have been a historical figure, but I'm also open to the idea that he may have been some kind of semi-mythological composite figure, or that his post-death legend may have been influenced by other traditions involving dying and rising God motifs, etc. And I don't mean to speak for all atheists when I say that the lion's share of them probably believe he was a historical figure. Maybe that's too presumptuous. It's just that most atheists I hear speak sound like they either tend to believe he probably was a historical figure, or they don't really have a problem with the idea that he may have been a historical figure. Like myself, they just doubt the miracle claims attributed to him and that kind of thing. And of course, there's mythicists, and I think most mythicists don't believe he was a historical figure at all, that he was purely mythical. But maybe there's mythicists who believe he could have been a historical figure, but then his story was just completely mythologized. I'm not 100% sure on that. This is a brief summary from Wikipedia. I know. The Christ myth theory, also known as the Jesus myth theory, Jesus mythicism, or the Jesus ahistoricity theory, is the view that the story of Jesus is a work of mythology with no historical substance. Alternatively, in terms given by Bart Ehrman, love Bart Ehrman, paraphrasing Earl Darty, it is the view that, in quotes, the historical Jesus did not exist, or if he did, he had virtually nothing to do with the founding of Christianity. But getting back to the host's comments about her experience in Jerusalem, I remember comically thinking to myself, that kind of embodies that watered-down C of E approach to Christianity. As a Christian, I believe Jesus was probably a historical figure. And I'm just kidding my friends in the UK. I'm sure that approach is probably still much more preferable to the batshit fundamentalism we have to deal with here in the States. Some people probably think, why don't you go live in England then? Maybe I will. I'll get a sleeping bag and live in the middle of Stonehenge.
Am I wrong to think that?
No. I mean, that's quite different. But do you believe that his mother was a virgin?
Well, I mean, maybe that was a mistranslation of... Well, that's biologically impossible, isn't it?
Of course it is, yes.
Well, I mean, I used to make a joke that most second children are virgin births because you can... Anyway, we don't want to go into that.
Yes.
But yes, you know what I'm saying. Were you pleased that Rishi Sunak talked about Christian values in his... He said Christian values are British values in his Easter message. You seem to be on the same page.
Yes, I didn't hear that, but
that's what he said.
Yes, I suppose so. But I don't want to be misunderstood. I mean, I do think it's nonsense. But the Christian belief. I mean, today is Easter, and of course I don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and I don't believe you do either. Do you?
Do I believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Well, I mean, you're really putting me on the spot. I would like to believe he did. Yes, I mentioned the
that's different.
resurrection. I mentioned the resurrection. By the way, just quickly, because I've been told we've got to stop. When my son was 2, we took him to church, and the priest said, "You can ask me anything." And he said that my 2-year-old son asked the priest, "Do you know Jesus to be true, or do you believe Jesus to be true?" And do you see what I mean? And he couldn't answer that question himself. Anyway,
Yes.
or God. Anyway, listen. Lastly, just one thing. Does it matter? I'm going to ask you again if Christianity is a minority religion in this country.
I think it matters from a cultural point of view.
That's a very clear answer from you, Richard Dawkins. Thank you so much for joining us.
I love that clip, too. Your meeting will end in 10 minutes, by the way. That's a joke for people watching the YouTube version. Some kind of Zoom window or something opens up during the interview. But I found her comments or her reaction to the questions about the virgin birth and the resurrection to be kind of comical, similar to her comment about, her revelation that Jesus was probably a historical figure. It was kind of funny, she says, about the virgin birth. Maybe that's a mistranslation. It's biologically impossible, isn't it? I think parthenogenesis does occur in, was it like snakes and birds? I think especially snakes. Not birds, snakes and fish, I believe, but not in humans. Hey everyone, just another quick correction. I probably shouldn't have said especially snakes, although there are many snakes who are capable of parthenogenesis, usually accidentally if I'm not mistaken, because there's obligate parthenogenesis, which I think is rare when you have a species that only reproduces asexually or without a mate, at least rare among vertebrates. And then there's facultative parthenogenesis, when you have a species that usually procreates traditionally with a mate, but is capable, if they have to, of resorting to parthenogenesis. And then there's accidental parthenogenesis, which can happen in snakes, lizards, fish, and I was wrong, at least one bird, the California condor. I'm probably being a bit too obsessive. Maybe I didn't need to offer that correction, but I thought I would anyway, just in case. All right, now you know the drill. Back to the Week in Doubt, already in progress. I was reading something not that long ago that something similar to parthenogenesis can happen in human females. But disturbingly, it doesn't lead to viable pregnancies. It usually leads to a kind of tumor. And I don't think anyone wants to imagine Jesus was a tumor. Now I'm picturing Meatwad from Aqua Teen Hunger Force. If there's any Christians listening to this, please forgive me. And, she might be right about the mistranslation thing. I don't know if it's still the consensus, but I know there used to be an argument about what the Aramaic or Hebrew word Alma meant. And there was this idea that Christians may have been misinterpreting it to mean virgin when it actually may only mean a young woman or even a young woman who births children. But anyway, when he asks her if she actually believes, whether or not she actually believes Jesus rose from the dead, I love her response. She's like, "You're putting me on the spot, aren't you?" And I'm thinking, he's not asking you when the last time you had sex was. He's just asking you as a Christian whether you actually believe in the resurrection, the core belief at the very heart of Christian doctrine, And I noticed people in the comments section, once again, were really ripping on her for the little story she tells about her son confronting the priest and asking him this rather profound question, for a 2-year-old anyway. The consensus seemed to be that she was making the story up, but who knows? She may have spun or exaggerated it a bit or changed the wording. On the other hand, maybe her kid really did ask something to that effect. Kids can often say things or ask questions that are simple yet profound. I've noticed that throughout life, that often simplicity and profundity go together. Not sure about a 2 year old being old enough for that. Maybe. I'm not a parent. Kids can surprise you. But I remember thinking it almost sounded like, and in fairness to her, maybe it wasn't even on a fully conscious level, like she was trying to spin this grand narrative around her son. It was almost reminiscent of that biblical story in the New Testament. Was it when Jesus's parents are looking for him and they find him in the temple and he's speaking with the rabbis and asking these profound questions, and they're absolutely astonished by his precociousness, by his knowledge and learning. It kind of comically reminded me of that. But I think that's that, and I don't know what the deal is with me. I keep intending to make these relatively short episodes, and they end up being well over a half an hour, or in this case, 46 minutes. But that's it for this episode. As always, thank you everyone for listening. You guys know the drill. You can like the Facebook page. You can follow the show on Twitter or X, even though I'm not on there much. You can check out the YouTube channel. Maybe you're doing that now. If you'd like to support the show monetarily, which is always greatly appreciated, you can go to patreon.com/The Week in Doubt and help support what I do for as little as 99 cents a month. All right, brothers and sisters, until next time.